April 8, 1943. 27,000 feet above northern France. The air was thin, cold, and for the moment belonged entirely to the Luftwaffe. Inside the crystal-clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190, Oberleutnant Rolf Herrmann watched strange new silhouettes struggling up from the cloud deck below. They were massive, ungainly shapes, lumbering upward in tight formations. To German pilots accustomed to the lethal grace of the Spitfire or the razor-thin profile of the Messerschmitt 109, these new machines looked absurd. They were corpulent, barrel-shaped fuselages, wings that seemed too thick, cockpit canopies that sat high, like greenhouses, atop a bloated metal body. Herrmann keyed his throat microphone, unable to suppress a smirk beneath his oxygen mask. The Yankees have sent us flying milk bottles. Below them, 16 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group were making their combat debut over occupied Europe. Their pilots were straining to gain altitude, their massive 2,000-horsepower Pratt and Whitney engines fighting gravity and 7 tons of operational weight. They looked slow. They looked vulnerable. They looked like targets. What Herrmann did not know, what none of the veteran German hunters circling like wolves above could possibly imagine, was that they were witnessing the arrival of the instrument that would systematically dismantle their air force. They saw a milk bottle. They were looking at a flying tank that would become the most terrifying sound in the German sky. Within 18 months, the laughter would die completely. The milk bottles would transform into juggernauts, and their arrival would signal not just a battle, but the industrial execution of the Luftwaffe. The deception began with the design. The P-47 Thunderbolt was not built to dogfight. It was engineered to overwhelm. It was born from a moment of panic in June 1940, as German fighters swept conventional air forces from the skies over France. The U.S. Army Air Corps demanded an interceptor that could match the best high-altitude performers in the world. Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's chief designer, realized conventional wisdom would fail. To dominate at 30,000 feet, where the air is too thin to breathe, an engine needs enormous amounts of oxygen. Kartveli didn't just build a fighter. He built a flying housing for a massive turbo-supercharger system. The complex ducting ran the entire length of the fuselage beneath the pilot, feeding the starving engine with compressed air from the stratosphere. It made the aircraft huge. When the prototype first flew in May 1941, it shocked test pilots. It weighed nearly 10,000 pounds, empty, 65% more than its predecessor. It dwarfed the pilots who climbed onto its wings. It was a dinosaur, Kartveli admitted, but a dinosaur with good proportions. It was also lethal to novices. In the training fields over Bridgeport, Connecticut, the 56th Fighter Group learned the cost of this mass. Between late 1942 and early 1943, the group lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft before ever seeing a German. The P-47 killed more Americans in training than German guns would in the first months of combat. It ground-looped violently on landing. Torque from the massive 18-cylinder radial engine could flip it on takeoff, and in high-speed dives, it struck the terrifying phenomenon of compressibility, where shock waves froze the controls solid. But those who survived the learning curve discovered a terrifying kind of power. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, an Oklahoma farm boy destined to become one of America's premier aces, described his first flight as strapping himself to a runaway locomotive. You didn't fly the Thunderbolt, he realized. You aimed it. When they finally met the Luftwaffe in the spring of 1943, the German pilots confirmed their own biases. The American planes couldn't turn with a Focke-Wulf. They couldn't outclimb a Messerschmitt at medium altitudes. They were sluggish in a dogfight. German tactics quickly adapted. Attack from below. Force them to turn. Exploit their weight. Hauptmann Josef Pips Priller, the cynical ace, commanding Jagdbomber 26, reported that the new fighter was meat for the slaughter. It flew like a truck and climbed like a pregnant cow. The initial statistics seemed to prove him right. In the first month, American groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. The Royal Air Force, watching from their nimble Spitfires, politely suggested the Americans might want to reconsider this heavy beast. British pilots joked that the best evasive maneuver in a Thunderbolt was for the pilot to unstrap himself and run around the roomy cockpit. But German intelligence missed the anomaly in the data. The Thunderbolts that were shot down had absorbed staggering amounts of punishment before falling, and the ones that returned came back with damage that was aerodynamically impossible. On May 4th, a P-47 returned with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes damage that would have disintegrated a delicate Spitfire or a magnesium-heavy Zero. The Thunderbolt's massive air-cooled radial engine had no vulnerable liquid coolant system to puncture. It could take a cylinder hit and keep thundering. More ominously, when the Americans did get their sights on a German plane, the results were catastrophic. The P-47 carried 8 50-caliber Browning machine guns. Together, they fired 6,000 rounds per minute. This wasn't the precision stinging of light machine guns, nor the slow, heavy punch of limited cannon shells. This was a corrosive stream of lead. The true revelation of this durability came on June 26, 1943, over Forges-les-Eaux, France. It was the day the German laughter began to falter. Robert S. Johnson, flying tail-end Charlie in a formation of 48 Thunderbolts, was bounced by 16 Focke-Wulfs from Jagdbomber 26. The attack was textbook perfect. Johnson was caught in a murderous crossfire. In seconds, 21 20mm cannon shells exploded across his airframe. His canopy shattered, showering him with plexiglass. Hydraulic fluid sprayed the cockpit. The engine cowling ripped away. Fire blossomed behind the instrument panel. Wounded by shrapnel, blinded by oil, Johnson tried to bail out, but the canopy wouldn't budge. A German shell had welded the sliding track shut. He was trapped in a burning wreck at 27,000 feet. By all laws of aerodynamics, he was dead. But the Thunderbolt didn't fall. The Pratt and Whitney engine, shaking violently, kept turning. Johnson managed to level out, pointing the broken nose toward England. Then, a lone Focke-Wulf 190 found him. The German pilot, seeing an easy kill, pulled in behind the crippled American and opened fire. He emptied his remaining 20mm cannon shells into Johnson's fuselage. The Thunderbolt absorbed them all. Johnson huddled behind the thick steel armor plate, protecting his seat, feeling the sledgehammer blows of the exploding shells. The German, now out of cannon ammunition, repositioned and fired hundreds of rounds from his machine guns. Still, the Thunderbolt flew. In a moment that transcended standard combat reports, the German pilot pulled alongside the flying wreck. Johnson, wiping oil from his shattered windscreen, looked across the few yards of sky separating them. He saw the German's face clearly young, blonde, his expression shifting from predatory confidence to utter bewilderment, and finally, to something like fear. The German shook his head. He had poured an entire arsenal into this machine, and it refused to die. He offered a tentative, almost respectful salute and peeled away. Johnson landed at Manston Airfield. The aircraft was a sieve. It had taken more than 200 individual hits. 3 of the 4 main structural longerons were severed. The plane was effectively held together by its metal skin, yet it had brought its pilot home. When reports of this survival reached the Luftwaffe High Command, they were initially dismissed as propaganda. No aircraft could survive such a beating. But the testimony of their own pilots was irrefutable. They were fighting something new, an aircraft that traded agility for absolute indestructibility. By July 1943, the Americans stopped trying to fly like Europeans. They began to fly like Americans. Colonel Hubert Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, understood the physics of his machine. "Don't turn with them," he ordered. "Use your weight." The Thunderbolt's mass became its primary weapon. From 30,000 feet, a pilot could roll inverted and let gravity take over. The P-47 dropped like a safe. In a terminal velocity dive, it could exceed 550 miles per hour, faster than any piston-engine aircraft in the world. Faster than the speed of sound was thought survivable. No Messerschmitt could follow it without tearing its own wings off. They developed the boom and zoom. Thunderbolts would loiter high above the German formations, then fall upon them like avalanches. They didn't dogfight. They executed high-speed slash attacks. When they hit the bottom of that dive, 8 guns spoke at once. The P-47 carried 3,400 rounds of ammunition, nearly 900 pounds of ordnance. The Germans, often limited to 12 seconds of cannon fire, faced American fighters that could sustain fire for more than 30 seconds. The convergence zone, the point where the streams from all 8 wing-mounted guns intersected, was a sphere of absolute destruction, roughly 6 feet across. On August 17, 1943, during the disastrous Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid, Major David Schilling led a flight of Thunderbolts against German heavy fighters attacking the B-17 seconds. A Luftwaffe gunner, who survived the encounter, described the P-47 seconds coming down like hammers from heaven. He watched a Messerschmitt 110 ahead of him get caught in the convergence zone. It didn't just catch fire, it disassembled. Wings sheared off. The tail section vanished. In 2 seconds of firing time, a twin-engine heavy fighter was reduced to a cloud of aluminum confetti. They weren't just losing aircraft, they were losing them violently, instantly, with no chance for the crews to bail out. As 1,943 turned to 1,944, the industrial monster evolved. The P-47 received a new propeller, the paddle blade, 13 feet in diameter, with massive, broad cords. These blades bit into the thin, high-altitude air with savage efficiency. Suddenly, the pregnant cow could climb. The climb rate jumped from a sluggish 2,200 feet per minute to nearly 3,000. They could now match the Germans in the vertical. Heinz Nock, a Luftwaffe ace with over 200 missions, noted the terrifying change in February 1944. "The fat American fighters have learned to climb," he wrote. His squadron bounced a flight of P-47 seconds, expecting the usual slow response. Instead, the Thunderbolts turned into the attack and followed the Germans straight up to 30,000 feet. Nock watched his wingman get blown apart by a machine that shouldn't have been there. The sound changed, too. The tips of those massive new propellers broke the sound barrier at full power, creating a continuous, deeper roar that could be heard miles before the aircraft were seen. The German ground troops gave it a new name, Donnerschlag, thunderclap. By the spring of 1944, the P-51 Mustang arrived to take over the long-range, high-altitude escort duties. The Thunderbolt, freed from its primary role, dropped down to the deck and found its true calling. It became the Jabo Jagdbomber. The invasion of Europe was imminent, and the Thunderbolt became the flying artillery of the Allied advance. Its ruggedness, once a survival trait in air-to-air combat, now made it the ultimate ground attack machine. It could shrug off the light flak and small arms fire that made low-level strafing suicidal for other aircraft. It carried a payload that rivaled medium bombers, 2,000-pound bombs, or 10 5-inch high-velocity rockets, each with the explosive power of a 105mm artillery shell. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, they formed an impenetrable ceiling of aluminum over Normandy. German fighters that tried to reach the beaches were massacred. Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdbomber, II, barely survived the attempt, reporting that Thunderbolts were stacked from the waves to the stratosphere. You couldn't climb over them, couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into rain. In the weeks after D-Day, they systematically strangled the Wehrmacht in France. In June alone, the 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives and nearly 4,000 trucks. They didn't just attack military columns. They attacked the very infrastructure of movement. German Panzer Commander Hans von Luck experienced it firsthand. The Jabos flew so low he could see the pilots' faces. A column of his trucks would vanish in a single pass. 20 vehicles transformed into burning scrap by 8 heavy machine guns. It wasn't just the physical destruction, it was the psychological terror. Movement in daylight meant death. The statistics of their destruction became numbing. They fired 135 million rounds of ammunition. They dropped 120,000 tons of bombs. They destroyed 86,000 railway cars and 9,000 locomotives. They broke the spine of the German logistical system. And behind every Thunderbolt was the terrifying reality of American production. Republic Aviation built 15,683 of them. At the peak, the factory in Farmingdale, Long Island, rolled one complete fighter out the doors every single hour, 24 hours a day. When the Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte on New Year's Day 1945, a desperate final attempt to crush Allied air power on the ground, they managed to destroy hundreds of Allied aircraft, including 22 Thunderbolts at one base in Metz. A captured German pilot, brought to the smoldering airfield, taunted the American commander, Major George Brooking. "What do you think of that?" he asked, gesturing to the wreckage. Brooking didn't even look at the burning planes. He looked at the bulldozers already clearing the runway. "By tomorrow, I'll have 40 new ones," he said. "How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German had no answer. He had lost irreplaceable squadron leaders that morning. The Americans would have fresh planes from depots in England before the smoke cleared. In the final months of the war, the laughter of 1,943 was a distant, bitter memory. The P-47 had evolved into the P-47M, a hot rod variant designed specifically to chase down German V-1 buzz bombs and Me-262 jets, with water methanol injection boosting the engine to a staggering 2,800 horsepower. These final Thunderbolts could nearly touch 480 miles per hour. Major George Bostwick used one to shoot down 2 Me-262 jets in March 1945. The propeller-driven dinosaur was killing the sophisticated jets of the future simply because it could take punishment that the delicate German thoroughbreds could not. By April 1945, Luftwaffe pilots were suffering from Jabo fever, a recognized medical condition of psychosomatic illness brought on by the mere presence of Thunderbolts in the area. When interrogators questioned captured German crews at the end of the war, the transformation was complete. The files from 1943 that dismissed the P-47 as a minimal threat had been updated month by month until the final entry in March 1945 read simply, "Unsurvivable in direct engagement." Decades later, Adolf Galland, the legendary general of the German fighter arm, watched a restored Thunderbolt fly at an air show. He turned to his former American adversaries and admitted the mistake that cost them the air war. "We looked at it and laughed," Galland said. "We thought you built a bomber and called it a fighter. But we were the ones who didn't understand. You built a fighter for a war of attrition. We built fighters for glory. You built them for winning." Galland paused when the big radial engine roared overhead, that deep, distinctive sound that had haunted the roads of Normandy. "Those guns," he said quietly. "We called them Roosevelt's piano. Once you heard them play, you never forgot the tune." The P-47 Thunderbolt had entered the war as a joke, a flying milk bottle too fat to fight. It ended the war as the supreme instrument of aerial blunt force. It didn't win with finesse. It didn't win with grace. It won by burying the Luftwaffe under an avalanche of industrial violence from which it never crawled out. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to them.